Aboru aboye. Listen, if you don't have a system, you don't have a practice. If you don't have a system, you do not have a practice. This is the School of Orisha Studies, and I'm your instructor, Obafemi Origunwa. For today's conversation, I want to very briefly help you see the relationship between your spiritual system and your spiritual practice. More specifically, how your system is the basis for your practice. Now, I know people who are completely eclectic. It's kind of the rule of thumb nowadays. You're just eclectic. You might do some kind of meditation over here, and you do some other kind of prayers over there, and you have an altar that is loosely based on something else. And on that altar, you put some, crystals and some eagle feathers and some sage and some pyramids and some fertility dolls, and you know what I mean. It's just a little bit of whatever you feel like doing at the time. You might do a little bit of astrology, and then you pop in and out of Orisha because you have an affinity for this Orisha or you have an affinity for that Orisha. You like this color, you like that color. It's totally eclectic, right? And you're just going based on intuition or inspiration or whatever. This is what I call the beachcomber. You're walking up the beach, and you're just finding things, finding things, right? And then one day you're walking up the beach and you meet a guy who's selling things. He's got sunglasses, he's got keychains, he's got visors, he's got all kinds of cool things. Oh yeah, I could use that. And you buy one of these and you buy one of those. He goes off on his way, and you just start using the things that you bought along with the things that you found, and that's just how you make your way, right? Totally eclectic beachcomber. Okay. Let me tell you, in the best case scenario, you're going to be just experiencing the placebo effect. In the best case scenario, right? In the worst case scenario, you're actually going to be successful in that some kind of a combination of those things is going to kick off something else, and you're going to start to get responses, right? Things are going to start happening based on this, this combination, this eclectic combination. Worst case scenario, because now you're starting to get responses, but you're not really certain what is evoking those responses. You're not sure what really caused something to happen. You're not really sure about what to do now that things are happening. How do you respond now that you started to make the call and entities are showing up, right? Now I work with people in the worst case scenario. I work with people in the worst case scenario where their lives are just inside out. They don't know what to do. I my most severe, and it's a terrible example. I don't like to think about it, so much, but it's a real story. There was a lady who I worked with once, and she was so bad off by the time I got to her. She was hearing all kinds of voices, and these voices were telling her to do bad things, like jump in front of trucks and cut herself. She showed me she had started to have cuts and things like this on her arms, and she was being victimized by her eclectic practice. And the hardest part was me telling her, you need to throw all that away. Everything that you've been doing, you need to get rid of it, right? And she was so attached to her practice that she didn't want to do it. She was really reluctant to let those things go, even though they were giving her hell. But it was just the fact that she was getting a response that made her feel like this is somehow worth my while. Can't I just figure it out? There's no way to figure it out because you have no system. You have no system. There's no way for us to discern what's working and what's not working, or what's working against the other. You need to start over and get a good firm grounding and a very clearly defined system in place so that it will inform which parts of your practice you need to, really shore up. This is why I can say to you with total certainty that your practice should have 5 elements. Your practice must have the calendar, the Osei calendar. Maybe it could be the 7-day calendar depending on where you are. Your practice must have the invocation, the ijuba, to make the invocation of the different entities. You got to have oriki. You got to be able to read obi. You got to be able to make basic offerings. That's the basis of your actual practice. I didn't just make that up. That comes out of a system, right? It's not eclectic. It's not willy-nilly. All of those elements are consistent with one another. Okay? All of those elements are consistent with one another. The calendar, the ijuba, the oriki, the obi, the offerings, those things all sync up with one another. They don't contradict one another at all. Okay? So as you get that practice, internalized, and you start to then experience spiritual maturity, and you get to take on a greater spiritual charge, and you have more spiritual responsibilities, you can more reliably and consistently grow with your spiritual progress. It's really that simple. So having a system supports your practice today, tomorrow, and on and on and on. So I want to invite you to get trained. Learn a system. I have a very clearly defined, very simple system. You can get in it and you can learn it and move on from it if that's what you need to do in a relatively short period of time. But I urge you to get a system. Don't keep going for the beachcomber effect. Don't keep wandering from here to there and just picking up things randomly. Establish a real practice. Let me also tell you something else, anecdotally. Something that I know about other cultures. I've been going to Mexico, for example, at this point for about 15, 16 years, right? And in Mexico, something that I noticed is that they have a family system, right? So we talk about the different relationships between systems. The family system is pretty consistent. Then you got, because the family system is pretty consistent, then the cultural system is just sort of a continuation of that family system. And the religious system permeates both. So most people are Catholics. They have, a strong nuclear family, a strong extended family, and then the culture by extension is relatively consistent and somewhat homogenous, right? There's a lot of diversity in Mexico, but there's a lot of consistencies between different communities in Mexico, right? Then you got a religious system, Catholicism, that just cuts across everything. So that means that the people are participating in the system in a very consistent way, and then they're looking to Orisha for some very specific things. They participate in Orisha in a very particular way because they're using it to augment what's already happening in their family system, what's already happening in their community system, right? So Orisha does specific things to enhance what most people are already doing. They have a system in place, right? When I talk to African Americans, for example, the idea that, my family system is a binding system. I'm locked into my family system. It's weak nowadays. It's weak. And then by extension, because, the community is made up of lots of people who are in those kinds of really loosely defined families, then that's become part of the culture. What I'm trying to say is that there's an individualization of your experience. And then Christianity with it's very, your personal relationship with God, it also supports a kind of an individual pursuit and an individual journey. So, and then on top of that, you add to that Our practice of hoodoo is very personal. It's very individual. Maybe family based, but it's rare that you're going to get these sweeping generalizations about hoodoo and collective, hoodoo anything. It's very, very individualized to the point that most people who practice any form of hoodoo don't really know that other people do it. Everyone will say, "Oh, I just thought that my family did that with the broom. Oh, I just thought my family did that with the horseshoe. Oh, I thought it was only my family who was doing that with the salt." Right? We don't even know. So even though we're culturally consistent, our concept and our lifestyle has become very, 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 very individualized. That makes it that much harder for you to understand and appreciate what I'm saying about the significance of having a system to guide and determine your practice. Right? So what I'm trying to do is key you into some of the ways in which you've been conditioned and the ways in which your orientation has been shaped by your experiences, so that you can understand the limitations of those experiences and go beyond them. They don't have to limit you forever, but you need to understand at this point they are going to limit you. Okay, they are going to limit you. This idea of being totally eclectic, it's going to limit you. It's going to limit you. This idea of being an individual in the practice, you kind of just doing whatever you want to do, that's going to limit you. Ignoring a system, denying the need of a system, it is going to limit you spiritually. Okay? So as you look forward and you think about spiritual maturity and how you want to grow up, what do you want to be when you grow up spiritually, you're going to have to accept the significance of a system. Just like in your house, when you're a little bachelor or whatever, or a bachelorette, you can do things on any kind of schedule you want. When you got a spouse and you got 4 or 5 children running around, you need a system. The bathroom has got to be cleaned at a certain interval. The kitchen has got to be cleaned at a certain interval. The laundry, you got to go to the grocery store. You got to do this with the car. You got to do this with the house. Everything is going to be put onto a certain kind of a schedule. It's going to have to be systematized in order for you to accommodate everything that needs to happen. That's a part of growth. That's a part of maturity. The same is true of your spiritual maturity. You're going to grow up. You're going to mature. You're going to progress from one phase to the next. The only way to do that successfully, consistently, right, under a variety of different circumstances, is that you have a system. All right? And as that system you practice that system, you're going to know and appreciate all of the different elements that go in that system and make it useful, make it viable, okay? Make it valuable to you and the people who you're destined to serve. So again, in closing, in the School of Orisha Studies, I'm introducing you to a very clearly defined, very simple system. And in that system, I'm going to walk you through 5 learning objectives. Your calendar, your ijuba, your oriki, your obi divination, your offerings, right? And as you start to practice those, I'm going to walk you through 5 different spiritual capacities, right? The ability to invoke a spirit, to discern a spirit, to direct a spirit, to ground or embody a spirit, and the ability to return a spirit back to where it comes from. On the practical side and on the spiritual side, I want to walk you through levels of growth and development in a very consistent and reliable and responsible way. Aboru aboye, aboshishe.